topic, which is conducting on-site supervision of projects. So bear in mind, in this limited time, we can only cover so much. So we'll try and cover the most important things about this aspect of undertaking a construction project. So I think we might make a start, seeing to the delayed technical issues. Okay, so the areas we're going to look at this morning are supervising the administration of claims and payment processes. So what this means is, how do we know when to pay people, when to actually get our progress claims? So this is all information that is covered in contracts, of course, but there are a number of different ways that this occurs. And it's very important that we have a clear understanding of what is happening on our construction site in order to be able to administer claims, that is, make and receive payments. Okay. Now, supervise and maintain on-site communications. Now, supervising and maintaining communications is probably one of the most, if not the most important part of a construction project, the management of construction project. So in order to get your work done, in order to have the materials, in order to have the subcontractors, the labor, the consultants, it takes communication. The moment you take away communication, nothing will happen. That's the extreme case. So obviously, the better the communication, the better your project will go. So we have a look at what's involved in that. Ensure management of and compliance with quality control procedures. Naturally, it's not just a matter of getting the work done, but we need to have some form of quality control. And that's not just quality with the final finished product, but that's a quality control process to ensure that everything from the office down to the site is being handled correctly. Process of how things are transmitted, such as documents, such as orders, all those things. There is a process, a quality process in place that makes sure that we get that information. Imagine not having the relevant or the most current revision of a drawing because you've got it in the office, but you haven't got it on site, or your subcontractors haven't got it. So that's part of the quality control process, to make sure that things get done properly. Okay. And obviously, finally, is completing the project administration process. So what happens when you finish your project, the administration that goes along with that at the end to hand over to your client. Okay. All right, so claims and administration of claims. Now, we say that payments are made in accordance with what the contract says, because we have different types of contracts. Yes. Generally, in the lower or the smaller type of construction work, we have a stage payment. Contracts, standard contracts, such as the MBA and the HIA contract, or fair trading contracts, in actual fact, will allow for staged payment. So that means that you have various points in time based on the amount of work that's been completed that you will get paid. So that might be, we have an initial deposit, and then the next payment might come in when the ground floor slab has been poured. Okay. So up until that time, the builder doesn't get paid anymore other than his deposit. So if he finishes it in 2 weeks, he gets his money in 2 weeks. If he finishes it in 2 months, he gets his money in 2 months. That's staged payment. So you get paid at various stages, and they might be, usually they're around 5-6 payments, okay, over the course of the project. That's stage payment. The other type of payment, which is more common in larger work or commercial work, is a monthly payment. A monthly payment, which is based on the amount of work you did in that month. So let's say if we're in July now, coming towards the end of July, on the 1st of August, I would claim for all the work I undertook in July. Okay, so, and that's basically a percentage complete. So if I've done 30% of the work, I get paid for 30% of the work. If I've done 50% of the total contract work, I get paid for 50% of the total contract work. So in that stage, in that percentage complete payment, we submit our progress claim based on the amount of work that we have completed that month. Okay, and the way we do that is we have a list of all the activities or the tasks, and we have a percentage complete next to them. And that way the client can check and say, yes, the painting has been done 100%, okay, or 80%. So we claim 80% of the contract value for that painting if we've completed 80%. All right. Now, variations are an interesting part of the whole construction process, because variations will occur. It's just a matter of whether they're minor, major, and how they originate. And we will look at that a little bit later. But whatever happens, variations need to be authorized. They need to be signed off. They need to be approved before they are undertaken. Okay, unless, of course, there are extreme examples where a variation needs to occur because and it needs to happen immediately because of the safety reasons. Okay. Back charges. Again, we're going to look a little bit more depth into these things as we move forward, but back charges are something that a company will apply against a subcontractor or a supplier for causing delay, cost, damage, generally. So, a subcontractor may have been, let's say that you've got a subcontractor who's been engaged to install some joinery, okay? And in the process of installing that joinery, they damage the walls, some walls, because they're moving things in and they damage the walls. Well, then the builder has a right to back charge the joinery contractor for creating that damage. So what does that mean? Again, we'll look at it a little bit later, but it means asking for whatever it's cost you as a builder, you are eligible to charge that subcontractor because he created the issue. Okay. Payment of invoices for material supplies authorized. So obviously invoices from suppliers or invoices from subcontractors need to be authorized before we make payment. How do we authorize them? Well, generally we check to see that the work's done. How do we check? We either have a contracts administrator within our organization who will go to the site and look at the work and look at the subcontractor's original quote and compare and say, okay, this is the amount of work that's been done and this is the amount of payment that he's asking for. Is it fair? Has he completed 60% of the work, or has he only completed 50% of the work? If he's only completed 50% and he's charging for 60%, we will not pay that invoice. We will deduct the 10% and say, no, you've only done 50% of the work. Okay, so payment of invoices needs to be authorized by examining the actual extent of work. And obviously that work needs to be justified correctly, we need to make sure that it is the proper, efficient work that needs to have been done. Now, insurance claims, sometimes these occur, not often, but sometimes they occur. They may occur because we have heavy rain and somehow water has actually damaged part of our building because we haven't finished the work, we haven't sealed it, it is an accident of nature, okay? It could be rain, it could be wind, it could be many reasons why we have an insurance claim, but it's not so common. And that's a good thing, because every time you make a claim, your premiums might go up. So but they do occur, and when they do occur, when we do have an insurance claim that we can claim against because of damage of some sort, we need to keep lots of documentation, because the insurance company will want to examine everything very closely to see what happened. Was there somebody at fault? And examine it carefully before they make payment. Contractual payments, as I said earlier, these are payments made by the client to the builder, or by the builder to the subcontractor, as per the agreement that has been made, and that's generally specified in the contract. Okay. Often you'll see subcontractors on their quotations, they'll say payment within 7 days, or they'll have payment within 14 days. That's all good and probably for them, but if we have a contract with them, that will override that. In the contract, we will say, we will pay you in 30 days or 14 days. So that's what we're going to go by, not what they state. But we always need to refer back to the contract, because we may have different agreements with different subcontractors. But generally, we have an initial deposit in many instances. Okay. Then we have to verify the work, which is what I just said. That may involve a contracts administrator going to the project, or the site manager, site supervisor going through the work with us and saying, yes, this subcontractor has done 50% of the work, or 10%, or whatever the case may be. So midpoint payments, that is basically all the payments that are made after the initial deposit and before the final payment. Okay. Now, there's also things to remember, that we may have retention, which is a very common thing, okay, to have retention, and that is for money held back from each progress claim that the subcontractor submits. We may be holding back a percentage, and that might be 10% of his actual invoice until we reach 5% of his total contract sum. So if his contract sum is $100,000, we may hold a retention of $5,000, 5%. And we hold 10% of each claim until we reach that $5,000. And then we don't hold any more. It's capped, $5,000. That's one way, and that used to be the most traditional way of holding retention. Now we see a lot more bank guarantees coming into play, where the contractor will provide a bank guarantee that the head contractor can call upon if he needs to. Okay, the purpose of retention is to be there in case we need to take some money from the contractor for back charges, for delays, or for whatever reason, to rectify defects. And usually it's released in 2 stages, one upon completion of the project, and the second upon the defects. So 50%, that's 2.5% generally upon completion of the works, and then another 2.5% upon the completion or expiration of the defects liability period, which might be 6 months or a year, depends on the project. And then we have the final payment, as obviously the case. There's always going to be a final payment. So variations, identifying variations to the contract. Okay, so why do variations occur? Well, quite often they can occur for many reasons, and they could be client initiated. That is, the client may decide, I want to change the color of this, I want to change this wall from this position to that position. So it's changes to the original scope of works that the client may desire. Okay, so when this occurs, the client needs to contact the builder and advise him that he wants to make these changes. Now, he could either do it directly or through his architect. And then basically the builder may be asked to give a price. And there's always a clause in the contract which relates to variations, because in a variation, we can actually submit our cost price to do something plus our margin. And our margin is generally greater than our margin that we have as a profit margin in the overall contract. So if we've undertaken the project, let's say at a 10% margin, because they're friends of ours and we want to do it at 10%, but variations will be charged at 20. And that's a figure that's agreed upon in the contract. So you can put that figure in there, whether you want 15, 20, 25% for variations, because often, yes, it can be good money for the builder, but it also can interrupt the workflow, interrupt the schedule of the builder. It can be, if there's lots of variations, the builder doesn't have it becomes very interruptive of his work, because he's got to move away from what was programmed and scheduled to start incorporating variations. And that's another thing, that variations may allow for, because of the nature of the variation, a increase in time. So it's an extension of time claim that the builder has. In other words, if we were supposed to finish the job in 300 days, because of the variations that have occurred, we now have another 60 days on top. So the contract extension is 360 days in total. And so there's no liquidated damages because we don't finish in 300 days. Important thing with variations is they must be in writing and they must be signed by both parties. Okay, that's crucial to make sure there is no issues afterwards, because often you will have issues at the end of the project about variations. Oh, that's too much money. I didn't think it cost so much. You were just changing the color. I didn't expect it to be so expensive. You have issues that arise. So like always, better to be upfront and clear with what things are going to cost. And the best way to make sure you have that is in writing. Okay, and we do this through variation orders. Okay, we have an order to undertake a variation, and we detail what the variation is, what the cost is, what's involved. Okay, and we submit our variation claim, and often they're submitted as part of the progress claim we submit every month. So here we have, again, detailing what I've just talked about. It could also be an omission from the scope of works, okay, not just an addition. So in other words, if your client is saying, oh, geez, this house is now costing me too much. I expected I was just going to pay $800,000, but the way things are going, it looks like we're going to pay $890,000. I think we need to cut back on some things. So we will deduct, instead of having, certain things that are going to cost. We might say, okay, let's remove this window from here and this point, and let's put just plat it, no window in that location. We don't need that. Okay, so we might start cutting down costs by making changes. So remember that variations can also work the other way, not always an increase. Okay, we might change from a porcelain tile to a ceramic tile to decrease the cost. Okay, so these are variations. So it could be the quality of the work, the quality of the product, or the quantity of the work. So we might have less of an area that we do rather than a bigger area. Okay, so always remember that there may be a change in cost, and there may be a change in the time period of the program, okay, with variations. Back charges can be incurred in a few different ways, basically for defective work or materials. So if the work hasn't been done properly, and let's say we don't want to get that person back to do it again because we think he's not capable of doing that job properly, we bring in somebody else. So therefore, whatever the cost of that other person to do the work, we're going to pass that back on or take it from that original contractor's, subcontractor's contract value. Okay. Or, as I said previously, for damage, if a subcontractor does some damage, then he needs to pay for it, as per the example I gave you earlier, cost of repair. Clean up. Okay, if they don't clean up their mess and it's part of their contract, or they create mess that they shouldn't have, then we can back charge them. Or if we hire equipment for them, let's say, or loan them equipment, we may be able to charge them for that equipment. If they say to us, look, we need to get a mobile crane here to lift our goods up, can you organize that for us? And because we may have a better deal with the crane company, we might be able to get it at a better rate, we may be able to get it faster. We will do that as the builder to help them, but we will back charge them for the cost of the crane. Okay. So this is just best practices for invoice. Send them on time, keep them, you know, if they're messy, it's hard to understand what they're pricing, what they're, it has to be easy for the head builder to look at it and say, yes, okay, this is a valid, it's all in order, pay it, okay? Same thing with the client. If the client doesn't understand your progress claim, or if there are aspects to it that are complicated, guess what? Your payment's not going to be made straight away. So make it clear, make it easy to understand. So we have to document everything simply, okay? So sometimes we need to get compensated because of a problem, and that might be for whatever reason. Let's say the supplier doesn't do what he was supposed to do. Okay, then we may have a claim against him, and this could be a serious problem if we're waiting for an order of materials to arrive and it doesn't arrive for, let's say, 1-2 weeks, and it delays our project. Then we may have to face all sorts of costs. So we need to add all those costs up and be compensated by the supplier. Or if there's an error in, let's say, a consultant's drawing, the engineer's drawing, the architect's drawing, and we pick that error up and we go, oops, there's a problem here, we can't proceed with this. So our subcontractors may have to stop, our job may have to stop totally. So what happens there? You know, we have to look at, what does this cost us as the builder, other than the time, potential liquidated damages? What does it cost us? We may have charges coming from the subcontractor who's hired equipment to do the work on that day, and yet the material doesn't arrive. He may have to pay wages. He may have to, there may be a whole series of costs that are associated with something not going to plan. And if it's a supplier's fault, we may be in a position to be compensated, okay? So you need to be fully aware of the agreements you make with your suppliers. Okay, so here we have you know, documents that may be required in our claim. Okay, so we have something that might be hired equipment, plant or equipment, other equipment. There might be damage to buildings that need to be rectified, and again, we can charge for that. Let's say the supplier didn't bring the roof sheets when he was supposed to, and we had to, and we had some water damage. Or, you know, there's different scenarios, and often they become quite, they're not so black and white, as I said yesterday, with things. And that's why we have construction lawyers and consultants and various other people who make a living from dealing with issues where both parties think they are right. So it's best to avoid all these situations if you can. And the best way to avoid them is by having a clear understanding from the very beginning of what you are signing, what you are getting yourself into, what sort of products are we dealing with? Do these things need to come from overseas, these materials? What happens, you have to ask this question, what happens if they don't come? Who's going to be up for costs, delays, charges, all sorts of issues? So we have to really think about our project. Okay, so contract administration basically will relate to things like what we're doing on the project, who's involved, what subcontractors, what materials, what contracts we have with all these people, when they're going to be paid. And this is something that's usually, well, not usually, it always happens before the work commences, that the contract administrator will sit down with suppliers and as well as subcontractors and go through all the agreements, all the contract, what is expected, scope of works, time schedules, what schedule of finishes are expected, and consequences of not achieving that. So this is something that is part of the contracts administration. And generally larger organizations, and not just larger organizations, but even medium and some small organizations have a dedicated contracts administrator. Okay, so if you're a one-man builder or a very small builder, you do that by yourself. You have to do all that by yourself because you can't afford to have a contracts administrator. Okay, but generally the structure of commercial companies is that you have a contracts administrator. You will have your project manager, and he may have a contracts administrator for every job. If he's doing 2 or 3 or 4 jobs, he would have a contracts administrator for every job if they're decent sized jobs, commercial jobs. Now, a very important part of the whole administration process is understanding your permits, your construction certificates, your DA, your development approvals. What do they say? Okay, because as the builder, you are saying that we will give you what is stated in your DA. So we have to be very, very careful that we do that. We do undertake the statutory obligations that we have, and that is to make sure we get certification and inspections done by the PCA at certain stages. Okay, make sure we look at any EPA requirements, like we looked at yesterday about the requirements for making sure what happens with our waste and our recycling and using low energy resources and materials. Okay, so there is a lot to understand that the government, or in this case, generally the local council, will impose upon us in terms of conditions. So it's not uncommon. It's happened to me where people have not, in my organization, didn't look at the DA conditions, and then we had some issues. So as soon as it happens, I set up a system in place so it doesn't happen again. Okay, DA conditions needed to be ticked off one by one. Make sure we do them. We can't afford not to do them and then have a delay at some stage. Okay, so obviously we need to understand what our WHS requirements are, what facilities we need to have on the site. Okay, what is our responsibility? Remember yesterday or the day before, we said that the number one priority for any contractor is safety on site because of the consequences of not having safety on site. Yes, if you finish your project late, you may have to pay liquidated damages. Yes, you may ruin your reputation a little bit, okay? But you'll get over that. But if you have a serious accident on site, you may never get over it. In fact, we said the seriousness of the consequences could be, it could ruin you. That's why We need to make sure that we have all our occupational health and safety on site done correctly, and keeping proper records for taxation. That's another thing that we have to do as part of our payments, our invoicing. Okay. I'm going to have to move a little bit faster because we've got quite a few more slides to go through. Okay, this is a really important part of the whole process as well, is supervising and maintaining communications on site. Now, communication is paramount to making sure that the job goes right, as I said earlier. And one way of ensuring we're on top of communication is by having site diaries. Putting in the site diary what meetings we've had, who we discussed things with, what we discussed. Okay, and this can be used later in a court of law should we require it. They will accept site diaries and file notes where specific information is written down as part of a file note because we've had a conversation with someone and we've said this is what was said in the conversation. They are acceptable in a court of law. We might have site reports from the inspections we undertake on site. Making sure we communicate variations properly. Remember, extensions of time. We ask for extensions of times for various reasons. All these things need to be communicated and documented. If there's work that's not satisfactory, we need to give the opportunity to our subcontractor to fix this. So we need to communicate this to them straight away. Okay, sooner the better. How do we communicate it to them? Photos, emails, telephone calls. Okay. There are software systems out there that will do this straight away, and a lot of builders are using these systems. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so what are site diaries used for? Document daily site progress. Who was there? What happened? So your site supervisor manager should keep a site diary. Okay, and you could look back and find information. Very important to have this. Okay, and this goes through the process of making a diary. So what you should have, and always we start with certain things in the diary, and we might have the weather of the day, who was on site, what they did, what areas they worked in, how many people from this company were there, how many people from that company were there. Okay, any issues that occurred on the day. So it's a very important piece of information that we rely on as builders. And file notes. So as I said, they may say what we said in a meeting, okay, and what was agreed upon. So a site report should contain details, firstly, of the site, and it may be what day it occurred, what we looked at in reference to the site, and it may be specific about a certain construction activity, or it may be relating generally to all activities to update our, let's say, our directors about where this project is at. Okay. Asking for an extension. Well, we might see that we're heading for our, we won't be finishing on time. So the sooner we talk to our client and say, okay, we need to get an extension here, and we may have a number of reasons, but we specify, look, we're asking for an extension of time. This is the reason why, okay? And the sooner you bring that to light, you may have a chance of getting that extension. Doesn't always mean you will, unless you have a contractual reason because you were delayed for, and you're entitled to that extension of time. But if you aren't entitled to an extension of time, and let's say, but you have specific reasons, let's say your project manager and your supervisor got coronavirus and couldn't work, right? So you can go to the client and say, look, this is the reason why our project's going to be delayed, because we've got these issues. Our project manager, our supervisor got coronavirus, and we don't want to replace them with anyone until they get well. Okay, see how you go. Or we want to replace them with someone, but we need to find someone appropriate. So, you're planning for an extension of time because it's something that's due not to your circumstances, not to beyond your control. Okay, and then we can set a new time frame. Okay, construction schedule. Very important part of the project is obviously scheduling and sequencing the construction operations. And we normally do this using Microsoft Project or something similar. And we prepare the schedule and we highlight the critical path. And the critical path is the path that's going to take the longest to complete the project, and it must be followed. So we highlight that and we work to finish all our project within that critical path or that schedule. Okay, and we may have some activities may have what we call float, where it may take 10 days to do that task, but we may allow 12 days, for instance. So there's a float of 2 days. Okay, so we factor all this, and it takes some skill to be able to do a good schedule on Microsoft Project, but it's essential. And what's very important is to keep this updated to ensure that your site people, so the schedule may be conducted by the project manager in the office, and he or she is in contact with the site manager, site supervisor on a regular basis through regular meetings. Okay, very important to have regular meetings with your site staff, and also with the subcontractors to give them updated schedules, to cut that 9-10 month program and give it to them every 2, 3, 4 weeks and say, this is where you should be at. This is where your schedule says you need to be. Okay, very important. Okay, planning for quality control, and that's obviously starts with communication, right? And supervision and inspections. You need these 3 things, right, to get the quality you need. So having the communication, telling them what you expect. I expect this job to be done as per the Australian standard, right? Or as per this sample of finish. This is what I want. So you're showing them, you're telling them. Okay. You may have a quality manager or an inspector in your organization, if it's a big organization, who goes around to the project and highlights issues with quality before the next trade comes in. Okay. So we highlight certain areas of the plasterboard that are not quite right. And we don't want the painter to come along and paint it, because then we're opening up other issues. Okay. So and this goes back to selecting subcontractors, which we looked at the other day. Do they have a supervisor or a manager within their organization that's going to inspect the quality before we, as the builder, inspect it? That's ideal. So they can rectify it before we do. But nevertheless, we need communication, we need good supervision, as well as, of course, we need to have good quality contractors, subcontractors, and we need regular inspections. And we may have inspection ITPs, right? Testing points, okay, where we test something before we move on to the next level. Because if we move on, then it may be too late. Such as if we're tiling, we inspect the waterproofing before we tile, okay? And any non-conformances, anything that we find that is not conforming to what the specification, the drawings, and the contract says, need to be highlighted and rectified before we move on. Checklists are a great tool. As I said, they are probably the best tool because they are the cheapest tool, and they make sure that you pick everything up. Okay. And it will help you avoid lots of issues, such as safety issues. If we tick off that we've got everything in order, then we avoid having an issue because, oh, we forgot to mention that because we didn't have a checklist in front of us. So checklists for critical, and we can use them right throughout the construction process. But that's a topic in itself. And here we have types of checklists, general safety before we start the work, okay, equipment, testing, checking that the equipment's been serviced, checking when it was serviced, checking that the equipment is working properly. It has the right safety gear on it, switches and what have you for safety cutoffs, first aids. So we have a whole lot of different checklists, and then we can come to checklists for the actual trade, the quality of work that's undertaken. How do we check, for instance, the quality of the painting works or the brickworks or whatever? We may have a checklist for that. Having a quality manual, okay, about the way we manage a task. It could be a quality manual regarding our business in general, how we do everything, how we communicate, things like the quality manual, how we communicate with our subcontractors, with our staff, okay, to ensure that we are giving them the right information, to ensure that they understand what our expectations are, to ensure that they follow the schedule, okay? So in fact, there's a quality international standard organization, ISO quality, you can get accredited for that. You go through a process, and I've been through that process previously, okay, to get those qualifications. And you have to have proper systems in place, proper forms in place, and it's a regular ongoing thing, okay? So these are some of the things that should be included in a quality manual, such as, your organization. You start off generally with your organization. Who are your people in your organization? What are their roles? How do things get done? Is there a more efficient way of doing it? Or is there a problem from information going from one person to another person? How do things get arranged? It's really important when you start to look at a company. In fact, there's people out there who just look at that. How are you running your business? So if I was to come to your business, having my knowledge and skill over the years with processes and what's required, I could say to you, look, this is not, you should be doing it this way to make it more efficient, to make sure you don't get yourself in any trouble, right? So there are things that people who have some more knowledge can assist you with in running your business, okay? And sometimes the fee that you pay someone to do that can be beneficial for your organization, save you lots of headaches, okay, down the track. Making improvements to the way you run things, to the way you do things. And certainly you can think about ways to make your thing more efficient to avoid any problems. Okay, so setting standards, and that could be not just achieving the minimum specification standards, but it could also be setting standards of what you as your company wants. So we call that benchmarking. We set a certain benchmark. My organization wants to be the best at doing this, right? Therefore, I need to make sure that I do this, 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 and this. That's how I'm going to achieve it. It might be, the standards might be, I want to make sure that my client is always leaving with a smile on his face, okay? Something very simple like that. So how do we do that? A number of ways, right? It could be the way you communicate with your client, the meetings you have, the way you share your progress and what's happening. Okay, there's different things that you need to look at, and depending on what you want within your organization. Training is very important for your staff, for your people in general. And training is something that is, you do get compensated partially by government. You have to spend some money on training depending on your organization, okay? But it's a very important and useful tool because you learn how to implement certain strategies and things to make your business run better, okay? And obviously, like everything, we have to manage the whole process of this quality management process. Are we doing things right? Are they working? Let's have a look, review. It's that cycle of we find what's not going right, we make certain changes, and then we check, have the changes we made worked? Are we now doing things more efficiently? And we can, check against historical records and say, well, we used to have, 5 accidents every year, but we've implemented certain changes because of our quality management system. We've implemented certain changes, and now we have 1 accident a year. Okay, so we look at statistics and we say, yes, the changes we've made have been better. Or the way we invoice now, we see that we've made it easier and we're getting paid within 7 days instead of within 14 days or 10 days, because we find there's no issues. Okay, so we can measure. All right, how do we improve efficiency on our project? And look at that. Communication is the key, people, as far as my beliefs go. Communication, okay? Communicate early, communicate with everyone early. Set realistic goals. We have to be realistic. We can't say, oh, I'd like to finish this in 30 days, but I really know it's going to take 50 days. That's no good. You're cheating yourself. You're lying to yourself. Reward regularly. Reward your people regularly, okay? If they're doing a good job. Reward people. Train people. Train your troops means educate them. Give them training. Tell them what you need. Listen to what they need. You might find if you listen to your people, they may give you a better way of doing something, okay? And planning, you plan because you have a purpose to plan, to achieve something. And of course, hire good people, hire good management. If you can't afford to hire them as an employee, hire them as a consultant to come and give you advice, to give you assistance, to help you learn, okay? Keep track of your materials, keep track of your tools, keep track of things, understand what you have. Don't just rely on nothing, because then you will lose materials, you will lose tools, you will lose everything. Okay, and give your workers time off. Well, that's debatable, but if they need it, you do give them time off, but it has to suit you as well. Okay, but you have to be, have the right workers who will give you 100% of their effort, then you reward them accordingly. And everybody should be working for the same goal, okay? It's in everyone's best interest, both employers and employees. How to meet your construction requirements of a construction project? Well, we have to look at our contracts, look at the scope of works, make sure we've covered everything, make sure our subcontractors are scheduled when they should be, make sure our schedules are right, make sure we inspect and test before we move on to the next stage of a construction. And whatever non-conforming we find in our inspection and our testing is communicated to our subcontractors, okay? And it's rectified. All right, so that's critical, okay? And obviously handling storage of the project, the materials, that's very important as well. We must have the ability to have materials, and materials handling in itself is a separate topic. When and how to bring materials, where do we store them to make sure we have them when we need them. Right. The processes in terms of what's involved in project administration. So we're trying to create this administration process and preparing for practical completion, because our contract says we need to provide this, and this by this date, okay? And that is basically a project with this scope of works to our client at this date. So all our administration is preparing for that. When is our practical completion date? Okay, we have an inspection and it's done with the client, and we go through things and we ultimately have a checklist of what the client finds that he would like rectified, of some defects or hopefully minor issues, and we do that, okay? So then there's a handover of various documentation that we give, and these include all the certification, all the warranties, everything that we need to get as a builder in terms of warranties, certificates. So it could be things like warranties for the air conditioning, right? Certification from the PCA, each level that we've certified. Everything that requires some certification or warranties is provided to the client at handover, okay? And the defect liability items, so there's a period of time where the client says, okay, yep, I acknowledge you finished the project, but here is a list of things that I think we need to fix, okay? And we go through those items, and depending on what they are, we might agree to every single item, or we might say, well, this one is not really something that we must do. And that really depends. It's hard to say without obviously being specific about a project. Okay, and then the defects are rectified and the sign-off is done, and that's the end of the project. So here are some documents in handover procedure, all the guidebooks, logbooks, approvals, equipment certificates regarding and warranties. So you understand what we're getting at here. And these are the things that are covered in a defect liability inspection. So you're basically doing an inspection of the whole project, the whole finishes, okay? Okay, and this is why it's important to undertake this inspection before you do it with your client internally. It's no good waiting till your client picks out all these faults. If you're a good builder, you want to do these things before your client gets there. I'd like to go through with my person on site and say, okay, or you might have a quality manager. Let's go through this project, okay? Pretend we are the client. Let's go through this. Are we happy with the finishes? What are we not happy with? So you make a list yourself before you have the inspection with the client, okay? And you rectify those things. You call your subcontractors. Might walk through and go, this is fantastic, okay? He might find nothing. All right, so thank you very much. I know I went through things a little bit quick, but I wanted to cover as much as we can to give you an idea.